Ever get that feeling like there's this whole secret language, when it comes to like these big real estate deals? Today on the Deep Dive, we are totally cracking the code on one of those insider terms that you might have heard, kind of whispered around Chicago.
Okay.
Special purpose vehicles. We're
Right.
talking SPVs for short.
What's so fascinating about SPVs, though, is they're everywhere in commercial real estate, often like behind the scenes making these big projects happen.
And we've got just the person to like shed some light on all this for us.
Okay.
Michael Linton from Chicago Deal Flow. He's been navigating the Chicago market, for decades.
Yeah.
And lucky for us, he's shared some of his insights on all this in an article, which you can find over at chicagodealflow.com.
Nice.
So we're going to dive into that today.
Awesome.
And trust me, once you kind of wrap your head around SPVs, you'll start seeing them everywhere.
Absolutely. And especially in a market as like dynamic and complex as Chicago,
Wow.
Michael's expertise can really help connect the dots.
For sure.
So, shall we demystify this whole world of SPVs?
Let's do it. So Michael, he lays out a really clear definition.
Yeah.
But in the simplest terms, what exactly is an SPV?
So imagine for a moment you're building a skyscraper right here in Chicago.
Okay.
You wouldn't just like lump all the financing, construction contracts, and everything else in with your own personal bank account, right?
Oh.
An SPV is kind of like creating a separate legal vault, a distinct entity, specifically for that skyscraper project.
Okay, so it's like a legal firewall around a specific project.
Exactly.
But why even go through all that trouble?
Right.
Michael emphasizes a few key reasons in his article.
Oh, yeah.
And the first one that really jumped out at me was risk isolation. What's the big deal with that?
Well, let's just stick with your skyscraper example.
Okay.
If, for whatever reason, that project hits a major roadblock, let's say a critical material becomes unavailable.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Causing all these crazy, costly delays.
Yeah.
You don't want your entire business to be on the hook.
Yeah, for sure.
With an SPV, that potential fallout is limited to just what's inside that vault.
Right.
Protecting your other investments.
That makes a lot of sense, especially with so much at stake in a market like Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
But here's where I'm curious.
Okay.
Michael also points out that SPVs can make projects more attractive to lenders and investors.
Yeah.
How does that even work?
It all comes down to transparency and, frankly, just peace of mind.
Okay.
Since an SPV holds assets solely related to that specific project, it provides a very clear picture of what exactly is being financed.
Okay.
Lenders love that clarity,
Right.
reduces their perceived risk.
Makes sense.
And when lenders feel secure, they're often willing to offer more favorable terms.
So it's like presenting a lender with a perfectly organized, detailed spreadsheet instead of like a shoebox full of receipts.
Precisely.
Right.
Investors appreciate that clarity, too.
Right.
Knowing exactly where their money is going and how it's being managed can make a project much more enticing. And here's like the really intriguing part about SPVs.
Okay.
Especially for those of you out there, interested in the financial side of real estate.
Okay.
They can offer some pretty compelling tax advantages.
Okay, I have to admit, this is where things always get a little fuzzy for me.
Right.
Michael does mention this in his article.
Yeah.
But I'd love it if you could just like break it down. How do SPVs actually translate into like tax benefits?
It really depends on the specific structure of the SPV.
Okay.
And we'll definitely get to all those different structures in a minute. But let's just say, hypothetically, you're selling a property, right? And it's held within an SPV.
Okay.
Depending on how you've structured the deal, you might be able to defer, capital gains taxes, which frees up more capital to potentially reinvest in other projects.
So it's like a way to like strategically manage your tax burden.
Exactly.
And potentially like accelerate your growth.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's one of the reasons why savvy investors often utilize SPVs. It allows them to be a lot more strategic and potentially maximize those returns.
Right.
And speaking of strategy, Michael's article also dives into all the various legal structures that an SPV can take. Yeah. And I think this is where things get particularly interesting for anyone looking to really understand the nuances of these vehicles.
He mentions a few options: LLCs, LPs, trusts.
Right.
And to be honest, those acronyms always make my head spin a bit.
Yeah, they can be a mouthful.
Can you give us a crash course on like those different structures?
Of course. Think of it this way.
Okay.
Each structure is like a different blueprint for your SPV, offering varying levels of liability protection, control, and you guessed it, tax implications.
Of course. Okay.
The most common one you'll encounter, especially in a market like Chicago, is the limited liability company, or LLC.
Okay, LLC, that rings a bell. What's the quick and dirty on those?
The beauty of an LLC is its simplicity and flexibility.
Okay.
It provides a good balance of liability protection, meaning your personal assets are generally shielded from any issues with the SPV, while also offering a straightforward way to manage taxes and ownership.
So it's like the go-to option for a lot of real estate investors in Chicago.
It's definitely a popular choice, especially for, smaller to mid-sized projects. Then you have limited partnerships, or LPs, which are a bit more complex. They involve both general partners who have more control and liability, and limited partners who primarily provide capital and have less risk.
So LPs might be more common in those massive joint venture projects we see popping up all across Chicago.
They offer a really good way to structure more intricate deals with multiple stakeholders. And then finally, you have trusts, which are often used for estate planning purposes or for holding properties long term. They offer a different set of tax advantages, but might be less common for, your average real estate development project, especially in a dynamic market like Chicago.
Got it. So choosing the right structure really depends on the specific goals of the project.
Yes.
The risk tolerance of the investors.
Absolutely.
And probably a whole lot of expert advice.
Absolutely. It's crucial to consult with legal and tax professionals to navigate all those nuances.
Makes sense.
But to bring this all back down to earth, let's look at some concrete examples.
Yeah.
But Michael highlights a few really fascinating cases right here in Chicago. One that stood out to me was the redevelopment of the old Michael Reese Hospital site.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge project.
Huge.
I've been following its progress.
Yeah.
And you're right. It seems like the perfect example of where SPVs would come into play. It's massive. You've got multiple developers involved, a massive plot of land, and a whole lot of city oversight. And Michael suggests that SPVs are likely instrumental in managing all that complexity.
Definitely. Think of it this way. With a project that massive, you wouldn't want a single legal snag or financial hiccup to jeopardize the entire thing, right?
Right.
SPVs can create these separate compartments, even within a larger joint venture, just to ensure smoother sailing.
Okay, so it's like having different project managers for each department, kind of keeping everything running without one issue affecting another.
Exactly.
So if one aspect faces delays, it doesn't necessarily derail the whole operation.
Exactly. And that kind of risk mitigation is crucial, especially when you're talking about the scale of investment that's involved in a project like the Michael Reese redevelopment.
Right. Makes you wonder how many other major developments around Chicago are utilizing SPVs,
Yeah.
Michael also dives into some other interesting applications for SPVs, including portfolio management.
Right.
He gives this example of an investor who owns, let's say, a couple apartment buildings in Lakeview, some retail space downtown, and maybe even an industrial warehouse out in the suburbs.
And that's a great example of where SPVs really shine in terms of flexibility and strategic decision-making. So instead of having all those properties tangled together, the investor could create separate SPVs for each one. It's like having a dedicated mini portfolio for every asset.
So if they decide to divest from a particular property type, maybe the retail market is, softening a bit.
Right.
But industrial space is hot. They can sell off that specific SPV without impacting the rest of their holdings.
Exactly. It streamlines the whole process and potentially makes those assets even more attractive to buyers who, frankly, might not want to take on a whole portfolio.
Right.
Plus, it just allows investors to be nimble and, capitalize on those market trends.
Right.
And here's another scenario Michael highlights. Distressed assets. Remember we talked about risk mitigation?
Yeah, the don't put all your eggs in one basket strategy.
Exactly. So imagine a developer sees potential in, a struggling property. Maybe an old office building that needs a major overhaul.
Yeah.
An SPV allows them to invest in that turnaround project, but if things go south, the potential losses are contained within that specific entity.
It's like they're able to take these calculated risks without putting their entire portfolio in jeopardy.
Precisely. And that kind of calculated risk-taking can really breathe new life into areas that are struggling,
Right.
which can be a win-win for developers and the city as a whole.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. It feels like we've gone from barely knowing what an SPV is to, like, understanding how they shape the entire real estate landscape here in Chicago.
I'd say so. They're essential tools for managing risk, attracting investment, and really just driving growth. And what's so fascinating is that you rarely see them making headlines.
Right. They're like these silent orchestrators behind some of the biggest deals happening in the city.
Exactly.
Well, huge thanks to Michael Linton at Chicago Deal Flow for providing the insights for this deep dive. You can find his original article, which sparked all these fascinating insights, by the way, over at chicagodealflow.com.
It's a must-read for anyone interested in, peeling back the layers of the Chicago real estate market.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, here's a little challenge for you. The next time you're walking around your neighborhood, take a look at those construction projects, those bustling business districts. Chances are there's an SPV quietly working behind the scenes. It just goes to show there's always more than meets the eye when it comes to real estate.
Until next time.